well as Facebook and the City of Manhattan's website. So I'll turn it over to the co-chairs.
All right, thank you, Dennis. I would like to begin this meeting of the Manhattan Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force with a land acknowledgement, recognizing our connections to indigenous lands, peoples, and cultures past, present, and future. We acknowledge that Manhattan stands on the treaty lands of the Kaw Nation, in addition to Native peoples from a variety of tribes living in our community. Today, there are 4 federally recognized tribes in Kansas: the Kickapoo, the Prairie Band Potawatomi, Sac and Fox, and the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. And finally, we acknowledge the Manhattan community's commitment to the future success of indigenous cultures and peoples. So with that, I would like to welcome our task force. Once again, I believe this is a 3rd meeting. So we're excited to continue our discussion on the SWOT. And before we move forward, we'll give Dennis an opportunity to conduct a roll call.
Great, thank you. I'd encourage everyone to unmute for this portion of the meeting so we can give a loud and proud hello, or however you want to acknowledge being a part of the task force meeting. I'm Dennis Marshall, Assistant City Manager. And we'll just go down the list. I know if I'll catch people later on, if some may not be able to join us right away, but I'll read out the names of the task force members. Brian Samuel, Adrian Rodriguez, Dansha McDonald, Dennis Butler.
I'm here.
Jason Smith.
I'm here.
Johnny Taylor. Jardine Coleman. Lori Feldkamp. Lorenzo Lockett. Pedro Espinoza. How about Paul Ship?
Here.
Ron Atkinson.
Here.
Sheila Glasper.
Present.
Susan Renzing.
Here. I'd also like to just note that Dansha entered the Zoom, but maybe didn't say present when you called her name. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Teresa Parks.
Present.
Vanessa Salinas.
Here.
Vedant Kulkarni. Michael Lambert.
Here.
Jerry Sextro. Kara Bruce. Manna Selick. Keisha Clark. Audrey Schwartz.
Here.
Thank you. Victor Banda Medina.
Here.
And then Professor Johnny.
Here.
Great. And then we also have with us tonight from the city, Ron Fear, City Manager, and Kristen Dolph with the City Manager's Office. That concludes our roll call.
Thank you, Dennis, and welcome back, everyone, for this work. We want to take an opportunity to reintroduce. I know we just did roll call, but we want to reintroduce some of the folks who hadn't been able to join us prior to this, and some new participants and members to the group. Victor Banda joins us from the Board of Latino Organizations. He's the chair of that board, and that is a K-State student organization. So Victor, welcome. We are so excited that you're here. We have Audrey Schwartz from the Indigenous Alliance, faculty staff organization at K-State as well. And Audrey, thank you for joining us this week. And Professor Vipavati Jani, and who goes by Viva, so is also here with us. And we welcome you, representing the Asian and Asian American Faculty Staff Alliance. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone knew. unfortunately, we're not going to go all the way around again and do full introductions, but hopefully within the work that we do as we move forward, that you all get to know each other in the sort of smaller groups as we move forward in this work. So I do want, I mean, a lot has happened in the month that we've been away. We haven't had a chance to work together this month, but we know that nationally, a lot of events have happened that touch on the work that we do here and locally in Manhattan, Kansas. So I do want to take a moment to create space and create a moment of pause for and to recognize the violence in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Boulder the last couple of weeks, and to recognize and have a moment of reflection for those lives lost, and to recognize that the work that we are doing today, tonight, it matters, and that your contributions to this work really matter. So I just want to take a moment. Okay. I also want to remind folks that our city is doing a strategic plan. So in addition to the work that we are doing here tonight for diversity, equity, and inclusion, those of you watching and those of you on this call tonight, you have an opportunity to either fill out a survey or attend one of the town halls that are happening, and that so I just wanted to remind everybody, you can hop on to City of Manhattan website and participate in that and share your voice and share your opinions about what happens in the future of Manhattan, Kansas. And so I just wanted to take a moment and remind folks that that's a process and a participatory opportunity for you to share your voice and your ideas about what we need to do moving forward. All right, we are going to go ahead and start our kind of higher level SWOT analysis review. We sent a document to you earlier this week to sort of share that SWOT analysis in a slightly reorganized way. So we've included the strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats on for each of the 5 areas that we're looking at on a single page, so you could kind of see all of those together, and we organize them, loosely, in terms of the things that people have contributed to the SWOT. We tried to organize them in a way that included things that were, we included them in more than one category often, because they just sort of overlap and they're intersectional in that way. So we just decided to do this as a model for you all to see. And as we walk through the SWOT review and think about, we're not going to read the entire strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Rather, we are going to welcome a conversation about that particular area and what you all would like to comment on in terms of that particular area. If there are additions that you didn't have an opportunity to make when you were reading through it, you're welcome to do that as we go through. If there are things that you would like to maybe remove from the SWOT analysis, or any comments that you would like to make. Any comments that you would like to make, and conversation and dialogue that you'd like to move forward. But as you know from our agenda, after we do this sort of high-level review of all these areas, we'll talk about perhaps what are those areas, what that end result is for us, which is those recommendations to the city commissioner. We'll talk a little bit about subgroup and the work moving forward, and then talk about our next meetings. And so that's the agenda for tonight as we move forward. Okay, Corey, you want to take us to that first area?
Absolutely. Dennis, do you mind sharing them?
I do not.
All right, very good.
Really quick, we do need to remind everybody that when you're not speaking, that you could keep your mute on.
So while Dennis is pulling that up, I'll just reiterate a couple of things that Tanya has already touched on here. Sorry, my screen has changed with the sharing, so just one moment. Oh. Go. All right. So just a couple of things. One, our intention is to spend about 15 minutes on each focus area. And so once again, we'll be doing that high level overview review. So obviously not going down each item of the list, but as you have things that you would like to elaborate on, or if there's things that you've added to the SWOT analysis, or if there's things that have come to your attention that you have questions about as you've read through it, this would be a great time to kind of pose those thoughts and questions, and then we will proceed through accordingly. So we're going to get started with the health and wellness section of the SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. I guess I will say we spent significant amount of time in our last meeting focused on strengths, and so we will probably give a little bit more attention to weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That said, if there's items to add to the strengths, please don't hesitate to include that in your feedback. So I am going to take a step back and allow you all to kind of chime in and add any additional thoughts or recommendations you might have.
Again, my apologies for missing the last meeting. But I was reading through some of these, and I wasn't sure where to put USD 383 strengths, weaknesses, and concerns. I did notice that students were mentioned in a few areas. In regards to mental health, as far as weaknesses go, there's not enough mental health structural support for students, and the offers that are kind of there, a lot of the people who need it can't necessarily afford it. So then we go into our part where there truly equity for that. So that would be a weakness that I have seen between MHK and USD 383. I know that we're trying to do partnerships with Pawnee and get them into our schools, which that's a big benefit, but it still costs money, and we're just trying to figure out ways around that. So equity when it comes to mental health services, especially for students in at-risk families.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
I represent the Flint Hills Human Rights Project and FHHRP and some other LGBT organizations in town sent in a letter about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and such. And one item that made both a strength and a weakness for the city is the LGBT non-discrimination ordinance. It's a strength to have it as a community that enacted that at the city commission level, but at the same time, it does not go far enough to prevent or remedy discrimination once it has taken place. So for that reason, that very same item was classified as a weakness as well as a strength.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Dennis, I believe you are capturing this feedback as we move forward, correct?
Yes, and I see someone else is also typing on our open document right now too. So yes, I'm trying to find where we mentioned that earlier about, I know the ordinance was in here to add about it can go farther. So I will add that, yes.
Thank you. All right, other thoughts on health and wellness?
So one thing I would add, I mean, I feel like since I'm representing Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, a lot of what I wrote was in the health and wellness section. So I think that there's some issues where I'm not sure if we have enough data as a community to know if it's a weakness or not, but I'm worried that it might be. So I don't know. I maybe didn't write those down because I didn't feel like it was evidence based to make a claim. But for instance, like thinking about maternal and infant health in city of Manhattan, and kind of racial disparities that might exist along those lines. I know that as a community, we have kind of some limited options for maternal and infant health care. So again, kind of thinking about healthcare deserts, and I don't know enough of that data to know if that is a problem in some communities versus others. But I'm certainly it's a I know nationally we have a maternal mortality crisis that impacts African American communities and others more than other communities, and so it's certainly a concern of mine and something that I would want to like be cognizant of and listening to other communities in our town talk about.
Thank you, Susan.
I'd like to add, if I could, to what Susan was saying about the racial disparity when it comes to health and wellness. I think we should definitely note that there's a very low number of minority doctors and health providers in our area. Black, Latinx, Asian. It's just a very low number, and that definitely, is an issue.
Thank you, Sheila.
I'm wondering if language barriers also are included in that, right? And so sort of thinking about access and equity, that not only is the underrepresented medical staff, right? Even if we might have some of those from underrepresented communities as staff, there might be still language issues and barriers there from different members of communities. And that affects it affects student populations and our greater community as well. And so I think those are really, really important points that you all are making.
Hey, missed the last two meetings. I'm Audrey. I represent Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance from K-State. I think the most glaring thing to me when we moved here 4.5 years ago is we don't have all the doctors. My husband's a diabetic. He has to go to Topeka for an endocrinologist. Like, I have friends with thyroid issues. They have to go to Wichita, Topeka, Kansas City. We don't have access to the care we need in town, and that becomes exponentially difficult if you are a person of color, if you are an underrepresented community, if you are, a lower socioeconomic status. Like, taking the time out of our day to drive to Topeka every 6 months isn't huge for us, but I know people who would be they just couldn't do it.
That's also a concern for the LGBT community. In that letter I referenced, the letter made a point of saying that the go-to physician in town for the LGBT community, Dr. Diana Brightbill, relocated, and there really isn't a suitable replacement for her except going to Topeka or Kansas City. So there's a problem for the LGBT community in that sense too.
I'd also like to add, I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that the health department, the Riley County Health Department, only has one translator that works for the entire county. And I know that is an increasing issue that the health department is trying to address, but thinking about the translation issue and the language barriers that Tanya was mentioning is definitely an issue with public health, because there's only one translator and she does Spanish translation. They don't even have another person that could do Mandarin, which is the second language that's spoke the most around our area. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
I wanted to piggyback off of Audrey as well, with the problem with equity of having different specialists in the area, but also for when it comes to USD3 and families, in that outreach, if the parents, if for us, if that's also not an issue for those parents and that student to take that whole day off to drive the 2 hours or an hour to get there, it creates a disconnect with the community, because we are not able. So like if one of our students are way in Topeka, we aren't able to reach out and touch base with that family, as personally as we would like to, and make sure that the proper supports are put into place. Too often this year, I've seen, either faculty, staff, or students, being in Topeka for long extended periods of time, which causes loss of education as well because of being, so far and unable to continue to travel back and forth. So.
So I think just piggybacking on what everybody has said, there's kind of two potential solutions that I guess would be maybe opportunities, like either asking the question, how do we attract more doctors and healthcare professionals of color or specialists or LGBTQ culturally competent providers to our community? Or the alternative is then to train the folks that we do have, right, and to provide resources to the folks that we do have here in our community to level up our culturally competent care, right? That won't solve the like specialist problem, but I think asking both of those questions and doing some reflection about what might be within our grasp to do as a task force on those questions, I think would be good to add somewhere here, maybe under opportunities. I don't know.
Another opportunity could be that some of us who speak more than one languages, we can create a pool of people who can provide that kind of translation services, especially for people who are coming to the university, especially our students who does not know the system yet, and need medical care. There could be a pool of translators from faculty as well as students and community members who can willingly do that for them. That would be very useful.
Very good. Thank you. Victor?
Yeah, I haven't been in the recent meetings, but just to piggyback, I grew up here in Manhattan. What I've seen in the Hispanic community is that, transition would help, but I guess programs to make these health type of things more affordable for them, because there is a big population of undocumented immigrants living in Manhattan, Kansas.
Thank you, Victor. Paul?
One of the strengths of Manhattan is people come from north, south, east, and west to come to Manhattan to do things because it has things to offer. And this notion that Manhattan does not have a healthcare community that's addressing the LGBTQ people's needs, I don't know the answer, but I mean, is there a way that the city can have an influence on the largest healthcare provider in town to create an incentive for them to make a space for that to happen? Because if we did that as a community, we would probably be pulling in LGBTQ people and other people in the surrounding area to come to Manhattan for those services instead of going to Topeka or somewhere else. I mean, Manhattan does compete somewhat with Salina, you know, but if and and of course Manhattan is always, and I don't mean to diss Junction City, but people come here for stuff instead of going there. And if we had that kind of service here, that would be an economic draw that would help the city bring in other people, but it also would be helping the citizens. And if we had something for the LGBTQ community to address those healthcare needs, that would be absolutely amazing, to grow something with one of the larger healthcare providers. And so, do we have anyone from Via Christi participating? Is there anyone that with the city that could approach them and say, "Hey, we've identified this as a group, with the Diversity and Equity Task Force, and could we talk to some administrator there? Is there something we can do to incentivize to make this healthcare facility create a space for growth for that community, because it's a growing segment of the Manhattan and surrounding communities?" Just a thought.
It's a great thought. Thank you, Paul. We have about a minute or so left on this topic. Any additional thoughts? I feel like we've had some really good discussion here, and there's a lot of room here. But in the last minute or so, any other thoughts that would be good to add while Dennis is typing away?
It's Ron Atkinson, Manhattan Vet Center. What type of medical care would the LGBT community require? Is that a valid question to ask when we propose that out to the community, to Via Christi and whatnot?
Treatment for AIDS would still be an item, but also transgendered care would be an item too. And that's not something every medical professional is expert in.
So I think there's actually two issues here, if I can be real quick, Corey. I know that we're short on time. So there's the issue of having culturally competent providers, so people who are actually like comfortable working with and speaking to LGBTQ folks as patients, right? So as a lesbian, as a patient with a medical provider, are they asking me questions that are appropriate? Do they understand what my particular health needs might be? So the culturally competent care is not about a specific kind of care, right? But is instead about a comfort with a community. But then specific to our transgender population, right, we're talking about gender affirming care that requires a certain level of competence and openness. And that might be an issue with Via Christi because of the nature of Via Christi as an institution. And so we might be talking about other healthcare providers in Manhattan outside of the Via Christi network that would be necessary to work with specifically the transgender population. So I think that we've been using LGBT when sometimes we're talking just about transgender, right? And that probably needs to be made clear, to your point, Ron.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Paul, I see your hand is still there. Did you have any other things you wanted to add before we transition to livability? All right, thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Tanya, and she can kind of walk us through the livability section.
All right, thank you, Corey, and thank you for that excellent conversation about the health and wellness. And I think that as I mentioned at the beginning, there are probably going to be some overlaps in the things that you see in livability, of course, because one of the things about livability and the livability of a place has to do with, right, your access to health and wellness. But outside of those concerned, if you have things that you would like to add to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we have to livability in the community, this is your chance to continue that conversation that we started on the SWOT document. And I should say, for those who were not on the call for the first two meetings, we decided to leave the definition of livability quite open. In fact, we never defined it particularly. And I think, and that was purposefully, right? Because we want to think broadly about, you know, what it might mean for different populations and what it might mean for different community members, to what that might mean, right, for lots of different people. And so whatever you might imagine that livability is, or whatever that, however that speaks to you, is how you can go ahead and contribute to this section.
If you don't mind, I'm going to add a thing to here. So livability, I'm going to speak on both USD 383, some things that I've noticed, also from personal experience, since it is pretty broad. Thank you for explaining that, Tanya. Livability, first and foremost, I want to talk about USD 383 since I am here as the CDI member. Homeless youth is a huge missed opportunity that we are trying to bridge that gap for. And the biggest thing is, what support systems can we afford, especially families with children that are now homeless? What supports, emergency, like housing, because like we have like shelters and stuff, but some of those shelters were completely full and it was freezing weather and we're scrambling to figure out a place for certain families to stay. And especially families with young children, that I think that's a big missed opportunity that MHK can help partner and brainstorm with USD 383. So it's a fact, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if their basic needs are not being met, they can't go into higher level functioning. So we can't do our jobs at the schools to help educate them if they don't know when their next meal is going to come. They don't know if they have a safe place to sleep that night. So that part. Livability on a personal standpoint for me, and I was just talking to someone about this the other day, is feeling inclusiveness in making the livability, my standard of life in the community, feel inclusive, and makes me want to be more involved in, like, I matter, I care to MHK. There's a huge disconnect. So I, as I stated in the first meeting, I am not from Kansas at all. And sometimes I question my choices, just to be, transparent. Sometimes I question my choice of moving here because I don't feel included in this community. I don't see a lot of people in MHK downtown that look like me, and I don't know a lot of people to reach out to. Fortunately, the higher ups in USD 383, not a lot of them look like me, but they have been very open and receptive about some of the feedback that I have given them. So I think lines of communication, we talk about in a previous one, how do we attract people to come? And it goes all across all professions. So
thank you for sharing that. I think that is truly both points, right? It's so important to reach out and care for those families that don't have shelter, right? The homelessness and all of that. And I really appreciate your comments about, right, that feeling of belonging that is so crucial. And I know this is why we kept livability so loosey-goosey, because these are some things that are really hard to make tangible and really hard to speak into existence, in terms of like making folks understand what that experience is like. And there are a lot of people who, because of the university, because of Fort Riley, who come in and out of this community from other places. But Vanessa, when you were talking about, you know, your choice to move here, right, when you are trying to make a life in this space, what does it mean to have that sense of belonging and feeling included in a community with a lot of people who don't share that cultural and share the bodily experience, right, of walking around in difference. And that is really it's really hard. Other comments about livability that you want to add to in terms of this is about?
I just want to add an opportunity possibly, or to create more, I forget, you just used a perfect feeling of belongingness. When MHK does like cultural events, ensuring that it's not like just surface level, that they're not just for one group, that we try to do multiple cultural events that creates a sense of community. Even when I lived in Orlando, there was lots of those, and I one of my favorites was the Asian Cultural Fair, and people from all different types of Asian countries were there. They even had dragon boat races. It was really fun, and I got to learn a lot, not just be surface level and, oh, let me get henna on my hand. I learned a lot while I was there. So even then, even though it's not my culture, I still felt belonging.
I love that. And that is an opportunity where the Manhattan community at large really can tap into like what's going on with university communities, and like and those university opportunities when those events do happen, right? Because they do, when they are, just to kind of create that network. And maybe what that could be one of our recommendations for livability is making these events more visible to the community at large, and not only into the university, or when the city organizes something, or when the high school organizes something, right, that we can really support those events and those opportunities, because we do have those opportunities. They might not be as large or as wide ranging as Orlando, but they're here. And so how can we really, you know, share and make those much more visible as a community together? Other folks want to talk about this? Victor agrees, by the way. And so
sorry.
Susan, go ahead.
No, I've talked enough. Go for it.
So I just sort of wanted to add to that. You know, we moved here 4.5 years ago from Michigan, which has a huge Indigenous population and is a state that really acknowledges what it did to Indigenous people. The universities work with the tribes to come up with new language within the Anishinaabe family for every event, right? They acknowledge the treaties that gave them the land for the universities, that sort of thing. So moving from there, that kind of community, to Manhattan was a giant shock for us. But I think what really set it for me, that made it difficult for me to live here, is that you know, I drive around town and there's an Indian statue on Blue Lake with no context. And it's like, what is that? Yes, the high school mascot, but it goes past that. My second grader came home last year, you know, in November, drawing teepees and totem poles with no context. And the school was like, yeah, we'll help if you provide us with the materials. And that's not my job. I'm a librarian, I can do it. But like, they know they have this problem, and they're not even addressing the curriculum problem at elementary school levels, at the lowest levels. And that has, you know, made it really hard for me to exist and my children to exist. Sorry. Because like, there's only so much explaining away I can do before I am taking over Indigenous, History Month and doing it on my own with my own children. And I know they have a diversity, group, and Susan's on that and all of that. It was a moment as an Indigenous parent that I was angry and I had no recourse to make. And it would be nice to be able to not have that in my life for everybody, I'm sure. And then also for, I think, in terms of livability, I'm trying to, there was another thing, I can't remember it, because it's, Wednesday night. I just sort of think Manhattan ignores what it doesn't want to see, right? And so the Indigenous people don't get any acknowledgement. K-State does a great job, but there are 6 of us active in our, group, and we can only do so much. So it'd be nice to have support and actually have the city asking, what can we do more? That would be great. And I do want to share something positive with you guys. The Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance met with the President's Council about 2 weeks ago now. And the university is moving towards renaming Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day. There was no pushback from the upper administration, and President Myers, in fact, said, let's continue to set a higher standard and do this. So, that's a great thing that we're doing. Hopefully that'll, snowball some, but I feel like, a lot of this is us not complaining, but pointing out what's wrong. And I just wanted to, say this is happening. It takes time. And I appreciate a president at a university who's willing to rock those boats in a conservative place like Kansas.
And driving on Bluemont, the east end of Bluemont, and looking at the statue of the Native American that's there, it's good that there is a statue of a Native American, but I've always thought it's kind of gratuitous that the Native American is holding a peace pipe, as if that's the only context in which we can recognize a Native American.
Yeah, and I've been told there's a plaque that explains what it is, and it's a public art thing, but I feel no need to cross that sort of traffic to read that plaque to explain to me why there is, a historical statue of a Native person. It's just completely out of context for the town.
Yeah.
And very jarring when you're driving around.
Yeah. There's also the issue of the Manhattan High Indians. I'm a Manhattan High graduate, and supposedly, and I believe this is true, there was a coach in the 1930s who was a Native American. That's where the name comes from. But most people don't realize that history. It might be time to find a different mascot for Manhattan High. I don't recommend that we go back to the previous name before the Manhattan High Indians, which was the Manhattan High Farmers. We might want to find something else.
Indigenous Faculty Staff Alliance has been in the fight for the mascot the entire time, I believe, that has been happening in recent years. And there was a coach, Frank Prenup. He was Tuscarora Cherokee, which is just a branch of Cherokee. But my favorite thing to point out to people who make the argument for the mascot is that the Tuscarora Cherokees don't wear headdresses. They wear turbans. So it's not even historically accurate, even if he was a Tuscarora Cherokee.
Yeah, that is an extremely important issue that I think this committee should make some recommendations about. And Audrey, thank you for sharing how, that pain, because that is a painful experience to try to raise children in i- in spaces that don't have that kind of cultural competency, but also to sort of experience those kinds of racisms, right? Those everyday racisms that we have to experience. Victor, you had your hand up a while, and I know we're a little bit over on this section, I think, Corey, right? And so we're a little bit over. But Victor, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say what you had your hand up to say.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna piggyback on what Vanessa said about we should have, cultural events in Manhattan. Like I said, I was raised here, I really haven't seen much, a lot of cultural events. There's a lot of, I feel like there's a lot of potential for it here in Manhattan. So yeah, I was just gonna piggyback on what Vanessa said.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I think we can support that. And Viva has put a wonderful opportunity. So, proposing a mindful space where the community members can meet as strangers and go home as friends. And so, I think we will move to our next space, but I want to make sure that we capture what was shared on the chat into livability as an opportunity, a mindful space where the community members can meet as strangers and go home as friends. Thank you, Viva. Corey.
All right, thank you, Tanya. Great discussion. And I just want to remind everyone that although we're moving through this agenda, please don't hesitate to add some other thoughts and commentary to this open document. So we made it open and revisable for everyone on the task force. So please, as you have additional thoughts, please feel free to add those, whether during the meeting or after the meeting you say, hey, I forgot or didn't get a chance to share my thought on this particular topic. Please take the time to do so. So with that in mind, we will transition to public safety. And I will once again just open it up for additional thoughts or questions about what's already here listed in our SWOT analysis.
One thing, and it kind of bleeds over into multiple areas. One thing that was concerning for me is the lack of diversity on the police force, which goes into, I think, one of the top topics on there. Statistically, even women, people of color, and LGBTQI representatives within the police force, there's not that many. You can count probably on one or two hands how many is on the MHK police force. So I think that is an area opportunity, again, going back to how do we attract people. But again, going to my other comment of inclusiveness is we can attract all the people that we want, but are we going to be able to retain them? So I think with that opportunity, possibly attracting people, police force that brings in family, brings in diversity, and it helps strengthen the community as far as cultural understanding, such as like I'm very diverse, Hispanic, and I'll just use my Hispanic and Black side of my family. We talk loud, and sometimes that can come across as us yelling. That's not what it's doing, but sometimes that's intimidating for people. Or certain ways that we talk, it may come across as us having an attitude, but that's just the way that we talk. So just having that cultural understanding would be crucial as far as that goes, and it goes into something else as far as comments for later, but yes.
I absolutely agree with Vanessa on that. Indigenous people are loud, and it does come off as off-putting. But way back in undergrad, we were reading Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. And there's an entire chapter in there where she talks about how people from different cultures and people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, like how they are comfortable with what is perceived like talking, you know, conflict. And I just thought that was, you know, that to this day I still think about that. So it'd be nice if we could figure out some sort of, I don't even, community event, workshop, something where we just sort of like, hey, different people talk at different levels. It's not aggressive. It's not, you know, we're not starting conflict. We just are loud.
Thank you. This is great insight. Additional thoughts here?
Just to comment on what Vanessa said as well, but it goes back to the having a sense of belongingness within the community. I think in order to have that, you must also have a sense of being accepted. And so if we're accepted, then like even just speaking loud because we're of a certain background or whatever, doesn't mean that we're a threat to anyone. So, but we've got to be accepted by that. So there has to be some education in order to let people know that that's what's going on.
Just an opportunity to add to that. Thank you, Ron, for piggybacking. Reaching out to like veteran affairs, because a lot of veterans will go into the police force. But we also have Tyrone Townsend. He is a amazing police officer that works for MHK, and he is a man of color, and he can speak so eloquently and explain things in a safe manner for everyone and ask questions. There's some questions that I've heard people ask him while I was standing there, and he takes it so gracefully and does that. So I think having one of their own do that education, as Ron was, you know, stating.
Thank you. One of the topics that I think that surfaced on several occasions that I think really fits here was the topic of community policing. And it came up in the sections of opportunities as well as in the section of threat of weaknesses. And so I guess I wanted to pose the question to the group if anyone wanted to provide some more insight or elaborate what that could look like or what that could mean in our community here in Manhattan.
Corey, this is Dennis Butler. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, yep.
Yeah, for those that are new to the group, my name's Dennis Butler. I'm the Riley County Police Department Director. I can tell you throughout my career, I've worked in 3 different departments, and one of them was heavily invested in community policing. Another department when I came to Kansas really wasn't, and you know, we embarked on really serious efforts on trying to improve that. And we're also working on that here in Riley County. But here's my point. When you ask anyone, whether it's a citizen or a police officer, what is community policing? What does it look like to you? I guarantee you'll get at least 5 different answers. I'm going to tell you from my perspective a couple of things about community policing. Number one, it's not a program, it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that your department and your leadership adopts in how you serve your community. And I'll give you a recent example of this. The day after the mass murders in Atlanta, I directed my patrol commander to have staff go out and start contacting what were thought to be either Asian owned or operated businesses in the community to let them know that we knew what had happened in Atlanta and what had been happening on the West Coast for some time, and that we're here, and that if they have any concerns for their safety, or any crimes that are committed against them, to report them. Here's why that's important based on my experience when I was in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. My experience there, and we had a very large Asian population, mostly Koreans and Vietnamese, was that they were very reluctant to report crime, extremely reluctant to participate in the criminal justice system. Sometimes it was a language barrier, sometimes other reasons. So we embarked on very serious and personnel intensive efforts to overcome that. Also with the Hispanic community, once the civil wars in Central America caused a mass migration to the US and to the DC area. So what I can tell you is, even though we're an intelligence-led department where we crunch a lot of data to try to direct our resources to where we think will be most effective, I can tell you from experience, I'm asking you to trust me on this, that to really, really dive deep into community policing, it takes bodies, it takes personnel, because what you're doing is you're not necessarily responding to data to drive where you send your officers or how they respond. You really are doing more of like what a school resource officer does. You're there, that's your beat. You spend a lot more time engaging the community because you're not working calls for service or crime reports. So the philosophy of community policing is community outreach. It's about trying to knock down barriers to reporting. For example, if somebody reported something to us that also involved public works, it was a public works issue or a code enforcement issue. In a traditional old-fashioned police department, we'd say, that's not our problem. Here's the phone number, give them a call. But what we strive to do is acknowledge the problem and let the caller or the reporting party know that we will make the contact with that entity and try to get the services they need. And then let that person know, if you don't hear from them, call me back. Here's my number. Let me know that you're not getting what I asked for. And then I'll run interference for you and try to get it. So you could talk to somebody else who's a police chief. They may give you a completely different answer than I just did. But I worked in community policing in one department for 25 years. I stood it up in another department in Kansas. And here we could do a better job, but it's not because the officers aren't trying to give good service. It's we are a very efficiently run department. We don't have a lot of extra bodies to engage in the philosophy of community policing to the degree that I would like. So I really talked about this a lot longer than I planned to, so I'll stop now. And if there's any questions or comments, I'll be happy to address those.
I did want to recognize that on the chat, there is a comment, great proactive outreach and support to the Asian-owned businesses and the Asian American community. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And, you know, I always feel like we could do more. I always, no matter what we do, I always feel like we could do more. We have a certain number of resources and we're very grateful for what we have. And I think we make the most of the resources. Again, many of you have heard me recite this statistic in the past, so I'll make it quick. In the country, there's about 2 police officers per every 1,000 residents. That's the normal average ratio. In the Riley County, we have a population of roughly 75,000 people, and we have 110 police officers. But if you used the 2 officer per 1,000 ratio, we really should have 150 officers. Let me tell you, if I had 40 more officers, you'd see community policing like you'd get sick of seeing our officers, you know, spending more time doing community engagement. But boy, would it be great. I would love it. So the ratio we have is 1.49 officers per 1,000 residents. It is one of the lowest you'll find in Kansas, unless you're in a very small burg of a community or a borough that's like a 1 square mile community. So I think the value that the citizens get here is extremely high. And, you know, I talk about these statistics on a regular basis, and go out in the community and talk about the programming. And the programming that we have here really is, in my opinion, top notch. And I say that as a 2-year veteran of this department, but 40 years in law enforcement. And I've been around a lot of other departments, not just the ones I work in. And what it was in place here when I arrived was amazing. And we're constantly working to make it even better, doing more community policing like what I described with what happened after the shootings in Atlanta.
Thank you, Chief Butler. It sounds like, and it looks like Dennis is capturing that our officer to population ratio appears to be a potential threat within our community, particularly when we start thinking about community policing. And so I think that definitely deserves note. I would also ask, I know we got maybe about a few more minutes on this topic. I see Victor's hand is raised. And so Victor, I'll go ahead and call on you here.
Yes, I do have a question for Chief Butler. I'm not sure how to exactly word this, but in the Hispanic community, I grew up in, there's, quite a amount of undocumented immigrants. Each time they're around a police officer, they're always afraid to interact with the police officer just because they don't want their name to be in the system because of any, have to go back to your country or anything like that. So is there any how do you guys work with that? Or that's my question, just so or like, yeah, what's your guys' policy on that? Or yeah.
No, that's a good question. And again, when I was in the DC area, we had a very large Hispanic community. But I'll tell you what our approach is here, and it was very similar there. And that is, as a police department, we are here to serve everyone who lives, works, or visits here. And if you are a crime victim or a witness or a suspect, it doesn't really matter what your immigration status is in terms of the police response and the actions we will take. We don't actively try to determine someone's immigration status. What does happen occasionally is, and this probably goes to what you're talking about, if someone has engaged in criminal activity and been previously arrested, has been deported because of that arrest, oftentimes their name will be in our databases as somebody that we need to detain for another agency. As police officers, and when something like that is determined, we do have an ethical and professional and legal obligation to take the actions that are within our authority to take. But in terms of us actively going out and trying to track down people in violation of immigration laws, that's not our primary role. But if someone's name is in the national database as someone who's wanted, who has a warrant out for their arrest, it would be no different than if it was somebody who was here legally. We would detain them and arrest them in many cases because of the existence of that warrant. So the fear that you're talking about is sometimes misguided because they think that, I mean, if they haven't engaged in crime, there's really nothing to be afraid of, in my opinion, from your local police, I guess is the short answer to your question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I just yeah, that was my question, because I know there's a lot of people who aren't engaged in criminal activity, but sometimes there's hate crime, and they just always have that fear on their mind that, like, if I interact with a police officer, is there a chance that I'll get sent back to my country or any of that? But thank you for clearing it up.
I would like to give you one more example of community policing in the Hispanic community where I used to work. We had large concentrations in certain neighborhoods of immigrants from Central America. And we started to experience, and it was a socioeconomic issue, a lot of crime and distrust in the police. Our police department, and this is community policing at its best, worked out a deal with an apartment complex owner, and we actually had an officer who spoke Spanish move into the community. That was their beat. That's where they lived. They lived rent-free because they were there full-time serving that community. It was so successful, and many of the folks that lived there were often crime victims and witnesses. The prosecutor's office opened an office in a nearby strip shopping center So instead of having to trek down to the courthouse to meet with prosecutors, they would meet over at that office with the local prosecutor, who also was a Spanish speaker. Many of those people were illegal immigrants, but they were not wanted by ICE or some federal agency, and they were crime victims in our community. And if we failed to serve them, the crime would continue and go unabated, and those responsible for it would not be brought to justice. So I just want you to know that that's generally how most law enforcement view this issue. The second thing I'll mention is I've been an advocate for many years of allowing people who are in the country legally, this is a different topic, but who are yet to become citizens, to be able to apply to become police officers. And I have run into quite a bit of resistance within the state from other law enforcement over that issue. But my point in doing that is I think there's a lot of people out there who want to serve, who can have a speedier path towards citizenship if they're here legally. And also it helps create diversity within your department faster. Just so you know, Governor Kelly's recent report on race and equity after the George Floyd incident actually had that recommendation in there. And it hasn't made it into a bill yet, because right now in Kansas, statutorily, you have to be a US citizen to be able to apply to be a police officer. Not every state has that requirement. So it's not universal in this country that each state requires US citizenship to be able to apply to be an officer. I would like to see that in Kansas. It's not that way yet.
Riley County is the only one of 105 Kansas counties that has a countywide unified police department. I was wondering, do you think that experiment on the part of our county has been a success?
Real quick, just so I can, Chief Butler, I appreciate if you respond to that question. And I believe Susan also has a thought that she would like to share. And then from there, we'll transition to our next topic of economic opportunity. So please, Chief Butler, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, I feel like as a short timer here that my observations as a short timer here, but a 40-year experienced police officer, are meaningful in that this is one of the best setups I've ever seen. And it is incredible that no other counties in the state have adopted this. And the only speculation I can come to about that is it just comes down to control, protecting turf, and institutions. Because you saw the ratio of officers per 1,000 residents. So it's much more efficient to have one department and not 3 or 4 with different infrastructures and leaderships and all of the other resources that go to running separate agencies. So from that perspective, it's amazing. And the fact that we're accredited adds to that. Who knows what it would be like if we weren't accredited, but the professional standards required by accreditation is very high. Only 5% of all police departments in the country are accredited, and there's only 11 in Kansas. And the RCPD was the first one in 1991 and has maintained that for 30 years. Is one of the primary reasons why I even applied here, was because it was accredited, because my last 2 became accredited as well during my tenure there. So consolidation, accreditation, anybody who wants to monkey with this setup really doesn't know what they're doing if they want good, professional, value-driven policing.
Thank you.
Very good. Susan?
Yeah, and this comment will probably lead into the economic opportunity, but just wanted to pick up since the conversation had sort of gone in, I think this was Victor's comment, about our undocumented population. I know that some cities have issued what's called municipal IDs. So an ID that the city creates for folks who maybe don't have a driver's license. So this is useful for undocumented folks, but maybe also elderly folks or folks with disability, mental illness, homeless folks. It gives them an ID so that they can hand that to law enforcement if they're stopped, for instance, but they can also use it to open a bank account or get a library card. And so it's good for economic activity as well as providing security and, let's say, livability for folks who are on the margins of various intersecting systems of inequality. So I guess it wasn't something that I had initially put on our SWOT analysis, but maybe now that the conversation went there, that's something that we would like to explore as an opportunity for City of Manhattan.
That's an excellent recommendation, Susan. And I think that we can add that to the opportunity and really think about fleshing, right, sort of thinking about how that works in other communities and thinking about incorporating that into the recommendations that we make. We also wanted to, there was another thank you to Chief Butler for in the chat, actually two more, for checking in on the Asian and Asian American community. That support and care is appreciated, and thank you for the information when we were discussing the undocumented and documented immigrants in your comments about them. All right, so also, and then Chief Butler said you're welcome in the chat as well. I have to read all the chat because it's public. It's a public and I should have said that to the folks who are hopping onto this call for the first time. We read the chat so that, because this is a public meeting, and so all things that happen in the meeting should be read to the public, and because the public doesn't see the chat, we read it out loud. So I just wanted to make just remind us about that. Again, thank you for that wonderful conversation. I do want to remind us, we do have 3 sections more, and we have hit 7:45. I tell you what, though, this conversation has been great. So I appreciate all of you, and we are going to perfectly segue. Thank you, Susan, for that opportunity. We are going to perfectly segue into that economic opportunity. We did talk a lot about this last month, but I do want to open it up to that more holistic strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So Vanessa, you're first.
Thank you, Tanya. And I think this will be a great thing because at Manhattan High, we had a huge turnout as far as some new stuff that we tried because of COVID. So looking at silver lining, positive outcomes of that. So usually in the spring, we have a career fair that's usually around the same time with the same employers that does the career fair that MHK does. And one of the things that we did with our conferences, because our conferences, we would have some parents come, the student-led conferences and stuff, but we had a way higher turnout and participation by allowing it to be virtual because some people cannot travel. So if we aren't able to do something virtual because, a job, you want to meet them in person, things like that, that flexibility, I totally get. Some of that may not be able to happen for certain jobs. But when we have huge events that would be an economic opportunity for growth, recruitment, diversity, why not have like ATA buses run for free that day to go to those locations? That would be a great opportunity. Another opportunity, and this is the last one I was thinking of, has been on my mind since I've moved here. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and I moved here from Orlando. But one of the things that Buffalo does, they do not have school buses, which I'm not saying get rid of school buses, not saying that. But students, my point is, students had a free bus pass for certain time frames. So some of our kids can't participate in jobs. They can't, like work credit, they can't participate in jobs. They can't do after school activities, which again stimulates the school, stimulates the economy. Or they can't do summer school or summer school opportunities and things like that because of travel. So going to Susan's comment about the ID, is there some kind of way where we can brainstorm for, children between certain ages at high school age 16 to 18, have a specific kind of ID for at a bus where they are able to ride for free during certain time frames that is either school related, work related, and or large events like the career fair that the city does. Why not make the buses free if you're truly trying to recruit diverse people? Make it, again, go back to equity. So that was my only comments.
That's an awesome idea. That's really great. And you know, Vanessa, your input was reminding me that you remember our very first month when we were introducing ourselves, and a lot of us have come from different places, and we were talking about the different towns and different places that we've come from. So I love that you're tapping into these ideas from other communities in which you've lived in. So I just want to encourage everybody to really think, and I think Susan has been doing this too during our meetings, but just to really think about what you've seen out there that's really positive and really would really just create more equity and inclusion and belonging and access for our community, because you know that these practices, they affect everybody, and it's just these are really powerful ideas that can really be implemented in a not very difficult way. I'm assuming. So Sheila, please.
Yes, I would also say that was really great input.
You muted, Sheila. Sorry, you muted real quick.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now? Okay. Good. I just wanted to say that was great. That was great input as well. And as far as economic development goes, one of the things that I've been talking with other small businesses about, as well as minority-owned businesses, in particular Black-owned businesses, is the overall lack of support of small businesses here in our area when it comes to any kind of economic dollars that are going towards economic development dollars going towards small businesses. And I think when you're looking at equity and helping to bridge the racial wealth gap, we have to look at what is the city and the county doing to support those small businesses that are creating jobs and those kind of opportunities. I had a comment in there talking about the small business tax incentives that other communities have adopted. Just in Shawnee County, they offer up to $20,000. I believe, I think it's $15,000 or $20,000. I know they're raising it for small businesses to be able to reimburse them for expenses in their business. And not only would that help minority businesses, it just helps small businesses in general. And it would help overall economic development for sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheila. Audrey, your hand was raised. So.
Yes. I think for me, what I would like to see actually ties in to K-State because that's why my partner and I are here. I can't in good conscience tell my academic friends or my librarian friends to apply for positions here knowing how the city and the university has responded to racist attacks on campus. Just flat out, that is how we're going to lose people. We are not appealing to anybody when they look at that sort of history and see that K-State swept it on the rug, or in a couple of years ago, had an ice cream social, or like that is going to be so problematic, and it's not being addressed.
Those are really good points. And again, I think I think there's a theme here that you see, right, of belonging, and what does it mean to create spaces of belonging? Because the opposite is so often true when you have these attacks or these, the constant feeling that racialization, right, is affecting every moment of your life. And so professionally and personally. And so those are really important. Those are really important connectors, right? From not just what's going on in the community, but what's going on in campus, and because it affects everything. Other comments about economic opportunity. And I will just pause here to say that mascot affects economic opportunity, right? Because it is this sort of marker of like it's not even insensitivity, it's like a racist marker, right, on the community. And so it's like that causes people, even if they move here, right, if they start to develop family or whatever, that causes people to think again about staying, right? And it's really hard to do.
I think
so
we have for us. Oh, sorry.
We do have a clarification question. So, if your references are Audrey were referencing verbal racist attacks or something violent, therefore criminal.
So I'm referencing sort of more what happened, with the student that shall not be named that founded the Students First group I think that's the name of it, on campus, that is very clearly a racist institution, and then continued to sort of harass people of color on campus and seemingly get no punishment and seemingly get no response. We got no supportive responses out of university administration. That sort of led to things like KS Unite, if people were involved with that and don't know what happened. It was definitely, it was a traumatizing experience for everybody involved. It was Zoomed bombed, people's screens were taken over, racist things were written. It was just sort of awful. And then continuing to this student who is now no longer a student at K-State, but being involved in the Capitol riots, in the insurgency that happened earlier this year. And so I think by our university sort of taking the stance that, yes, this is wrong, but we're not gonna say it, like flat out say it's wrong, really is off-putting to anybody of color who would want to come here. And as somebody involved in that, in all of those, in a lot of the events that him and his organization targeted, like, I felt completely abandoned by the university. Like, I had no support. The community didn't make a statement. It was just sort of like, I'm white appearing and for me, that was a moment where I was like, thank God. I can use that privilege, but I just, I took time off work. It was again, it was just traumatizing that there was no response. It felt like, and so, that is definitely gonna off-put people who the university or Fort Riley or anybody in town is trying to recruit. And certainly the mascot, we moved here and my first thought was, okay, well, now I have to get involved in this fight. Like, here's this battle I have to fight. I can't sort of like form a community and enjoy my job, and like I have to dive right into this other thing that is super racist. And I hope my child doesn't have to go to a high school that has that mascot.
Thanks, Audrey, for clarifying for that. And Vanessa, go ahead.
I just had a quick comment, which a lot of people do not know publicly. I got accepted to K-State for this fall, but because of recent events and stuff like that, I decided I'm not going to attend K-State for that reason, which I think was disheartening. I was so excited to go to my fiance's alma mater and get another degree, although my students say I don't need another one. I have enough diplomas on my counter. But I was very excited to attend for the computer science engineering program, and that it goes back to what we discussed before, being inclusive and welcoming, that sense of belonging. And if you can't protect those people or make them feel safe, going back to what was said, we are not going to want to attend. You know, I attend, again, going back to UCF. I went to UCF, this now the largest university in the country, predominantly white, but I've never felt unsafe on campus. Never, not once. And there was certain rallies that was held near or on campus, but I still did not feel unsafe. So I think that speaks volumes when it comes to those type of things.
Thanks, Vanessa. Are there other comments on economic opportunity? Sheila, please.
Yes, I just wanted to add, with the economic opportunities, access to capital, and looking at our banking institutions. I don't feel like that's an area that had been touched on within the SWOT analysis. When we look at other communities that we're basically competing for entrepreneurs, and even thinking about K-State students, Fort Riley soldiers and their families that may want to open a business and could potentially stay here for that instead of moving on to another area. We have to look at the access to capital in our banking institutions here and their willingness to work with minority-owned businesses and economically disadvantaged businesses. I think that there are other programs in other communities that have minority access to capital programming that I would love to see the city adopt or look into, because that would help with overall economic growth. Yeah, and I know we currently don't have programs like that.
Yeah, that's great, Sheila. Again, fantastic ideas and really important commentary on, right, like the idea we keep coming back to, and I think that's why this group is so important, is this idea of belonging, of that is tied to economic opportunity. It's tied to economics. I will say, as somebody who's involved in these efforts, the K-State does have, about 12 different different I'm sorry, committees that are working in response to this last year, both the national events that have been going on, but also our campus events that have been going on. And there's a lot of work that it's not super visible right now. And as somebody who's been working really hard on some of those committees, but these things are being discussed, they're taken seriously, and we're developing action items to move forward. And hopefully as they move forward, it will be some really visible action events and action items that happen and that affect our campus moving forward. And I know that some of these have been with Student Governing Association and making some of those student code of conducts more actionable and things like that, and creating dialogue that we don't hide these events that happen to our community, both on campus and off, but rather we address them, make them visible. We're not afraid to talk about them, and we're going to kind of move forward. And those of you who are alum know that these are not new problems, but those also, it's important to know that those of us who are, born and raised anywhere in the U.S. know that this is a legacy that we live with every day, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't work really hard all the time to fix it, right? And that's what this group is doing for this to make recommendations to the city, and there are people on campus making those efforts. So I had to share that, because sometimes those things are not visible to the community at large. But there is a website that shares that. And Corey, you got to take us to the next individual and family support section.
No, absolutely. But I think to piggyback off of what you're referencing on campus as well, I think that may be one thing that I don't know that I saw it on our SWOT as a strength. And once again, it may be partially due to the fact that it's not quite as visible, but the behind the scenes works that is happening to build an infrastructure that can create a more substantial sense of belonging for our entire community. And so I think Audrey may have referenced a specific example of that a little earlier today, but thanks for highlighting that as well, Tanya. So that said, sorry to keep referencing time, but we are at 8 o'clock. I know we have about 30 minutes to work through. And so, yes, I will, I'm more than happy to jump into individual and family support. And I will turn it over to the group and we'll go from there. Thank you, Vanessa. Go ahead.
Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot today. I was looking at the opportunities, especially when I was looking at this earlier, and a huge opportunity for family outreach, especially families with children, is the schools. That is the easiest segue. I don't know how else. Like, we talk about language. If we make the community a little bit more inclusive, we have translation services and opportunities within the schools. So as we're having meetings, and if that is a concern, we can try to connect people with, certain areas. So opportunity is in the MHK as a city as a whole needs to have a better communication and line of communication with the schools and working concurrently with us, just to support families and students all together. So that I think that was the biggest opportunity that was not listed, that should be there.
That's interesting because I think we did say schools last time. I just think it didn't. I don't think it got on the notes from last month, but we did, like, just to clarify, we were like, yes, Boys and Girls Club, schools, like, it's just so obvious. So I don't know how it fell out, but something happened. Go ahead, Corey.
All right. Other strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, family?
I think opportunities, in especially in the school system. I know when I first came to Manhattan, when I first came to Kansas, rather, and in visiting Manhattan from Fort Riley, it was the belief that Manhattan wasn't really inclusive when it came down to the military. True or false, I don't know, but that was the thought process. But then when I look at even now the Manhattan High School, even though I thought there was some talk of it, there isn't an ROTC program available for students who could take advantage of moving into the military or moving into different walks of life through the military. That opportunity is not there for students, and I don't know why it's not. I was told that one time it was talked that they were going to start a program, but never have. Even if it's not Army, it could be Air Force, but there isn't one. And I just thought that's something that I think Manhattan is missing, that students are missing out on.
Go ahead, Vanessa. I can see you. You're chopping at the bit there. Go ahead.
One of my many titles that I have at the school is I'm on a committee for work something. One of the things that I am really pushing for is not only work credit and work release for students, again, bus pass for that would make it much easier, but two, ROTC. I am also the military and college rep, so I invite them. I increase the amount of times that they come to the school, so that way they're more visible, they're more present. And I also request for them to make certain presentations, such as their NROTC scholarships. We had a student who achieved that last year. One of my singers did. So it is being increased like they were saying earlier with K-State, it's working behind the scenes, but it is increasing slowly but gradually, and I am pushing that button. So just so that way you know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Audrey, go ahead.
I'm also apparently talking a lot today. And I thought I saw this on others, and maybe I just glanced over it on here. Like a weakness around here really is childcare. We moved from a place that had extensive childcare centers, and trying to move here with a 3.5-year-old who needed daycare immediately was incredibly difficult. We got lucky. The center that we were at in Michigan had a sister center here, and because we were already enrolled, we were good. But we got incredibly lucky. Like, they transferred our paperwork, they transferred our enrollment fees from what we'd paid already that year. And since then I've had several friends have children, and I am appalled that there are wait lists that are so long that when you call, when you're in your first trimester, you still may not have childcare when you need to go back to work. Like, that is just unacceptable for a town like this. And I don't know what we can do. Yes, there you go. I see it. I don't know what we can do, but we're a town that is attempting to attract, people to the university, sort of younger populations. But we can't provide them with reliable and affordable childcare at any point. I mean, even when I had my second, I was terrified that we couldn't get her into the same center that my oldest is. And I don't know what the city can do about that, or if it can, offer any sort of incentives or more childcare waivers, help with the costs. But it was just shocking to me that there were wait lists that were longer than 9 months.
Thank you for sharing, Audrey. Go ahead, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point, Audrey. I have 2 kiddos myself that have gone through many different childcare centers and daycares and situations here in Manhattan. And I'll say the cost of childcare is high here as well. And then also another point is how inclusive some of the centers are. A lot of times my child was the only child of color in the whole center. And that is not very comforting for a young professional moving to this area and wanting to be able to do that. As far as incentives go, I was on a meeting last night with the Crossroads MHK, and someone mentioned that the city used to have some kind of where they were had some kind of city childcare way that they had some kind of and Dennis is nodding his head. I don't know I can't remember exactly what was said, but something about the city being involved at one point years ago, helping with childcare cost. So maybe that's something in the future to look at. But I was going to mention about young professionals in our area. It seems that trying to keep them here longer than that 5 to 7 year time frame is something that I see a lot myself. I'm at that a little bit past that 7-year itch, I guess, for Manhattan, being here 8 years after graduating and then coming back to the area. And so I think that I don't know what the city can do, what the university can do to offer more mid-level management positions, because you get young people, and I sound old saying young people, you get young professionals that come here straight out of college. It's hard to even keep college students here for employers that are trying to keep them. I have interns that I want to keep them on staff, but they are wanting to go to Kansas City. They want to go to bigger places. But the ones that do come here, once they get that experience and now they can go to the next level, they're finding it hard to find that next level here, and then they leave. So I don't know exactly where that fits, but I know that that does touch on individuals and families and trying to come up with some solutions to help them stay here longer with their career.
And that is definitely an issue at the university. I'm university, what am I? I have the good name, unclassified support staff, unclassified professional. And there is no way in the library system to get promoted, to get a raise, any of that without consistently applying for different positions in the library. You know, the problem is, of course, our budget situation. We can't, like, there aren't positions open. I'm trained as an archivist. The gig I got at the library is the only one I will have unless I switch focuses in library science. But yeah, like that is definitely something I see. It is something my partner and I talk about is, you know, are we going to stay here past tenure for him? Which is kind of heartbreaking, but also Manhattan is just not I guess for us, it's not as appealing past 5 or 6 years, because we are running into all of these sort of walls. And how do we as a city help overcome that? How do we as a city support, you know, university folk? I think I think some of it is a problem that has to be handleable, but we just haven't figured out how. And that I find very frustrating. But certainly at the university level, like, I am where I am and I will make the same amount of money that I made when I got hired 4.5 years ago.
Very good. I would say this is very rich and important dialogue that needs to be had. And I'm glad we have this forum to have this conversation. And I'm looking forward actually to even more robust conversation as we break into our smaller groups. And so that said, I am going to allow Tanya to walk us through, I believe it's our catch-all topic of in general. So the things that maybe didn't necessarily fall into one of our previously identified focus areas, I believe fell into the in general as a community section. And so I'll ask Tanya to walk us through that, and then we'll start talking about next steps going forward.
Sure. And so we only have 15 minutes. And so we might actually need to just take a couple of minutes and sort of, if anyone wants to offer up like an in general as a community recap in terms of like particularly the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, because we did cover strengths earlier. And, you know, I will remind everybody, especially those who are listening, that and perhaps listening for the first time, that we did extensively cover strengths last time, I promise. And so what we are focusing on is sort of catching those larger conversations that we make sure that we touch on any weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are not on this chart that we want to capture. So go ahead, folks, if you have something to add for the in general section. And then we are going to end up talking about just a reminder about our end product and then our sub-work group moving forward. Susan, go ahead.
So the only thing that I was going to mention that I think we couldn't have written down under opportunities before now is the American Rescue Plan funds that are going to go to cities is going to be quite significant amount of money. And I don't know if the city commissioners have started talking about how they're going to put that money into action, but having an equity lens, thinking about where we can spend that money to have the most impact for the folks who are at the margins of all of these issues that we've been talking about, I think it could be a huge game changer. And I would love to see our city really have a transparency and like you know an equity-minded like mission to thinking about those monies and thinking about how to spend those dollars in the way that gets us the return on investment that we have the potential for. So I think that that's a huge opportunity that is just recently come into existence, and I would love for our task force and the expertise of our task force be consulted when those discussions are happening.
Great point. Great point. And I will also plug the survey and any of these town halls that are available now for you to also use this platform, but then also use those other opportunities to express how exactly we need to see those opportunities arise and what best practices that might make. So Vanessa, please.
I believe one of the statements said also being able to sum up kind of things. For me, what I'm getting a lot from all of these sections is creating a sense of belonging and inclusivity. Sorry, can't speak today, long day. But if those two things were established, it would attract other people from multiple different levels of profession. They're more likely to stay because of the inclusivity of the community, but also having that sense of belonging. And the second thing falling underneath that would be young professionals or low socioeconomic families creating more equitable kind of things to give those families either a fresh start, a stronger foot to hold on to be successful within MHK. So that's what I wanted to get. And then random, there's nowhere else I could put in there. USD 383 used to have a diversity coordinator, and I think that would be good for them to rehire one, create that position and have one again. Because that will help with hiring. That will help with making sure diversity and equity is being implemented. And it creates a segue for when K-State is having those cultural events. We have a cultural fair this Saturday, but because of COVID, it's very limited. But when we have one every year, but a lot of community doesn't do that, and having a diversity coordinator will be able to do that with the local colleges, universities, and the cities. So that random opportunity as well.
You know, Vanessa, and I think it's a great point, and I would expand that even for something that maybe the city might consider, because I don't believe that we have a role in our community that has that focus at this point. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe surrounding communities, maybe such as Lawrence, has recently created a similar role within the community. So that may be something we would want to consider as well as a broader community.
And I have one more suggestion. As an architect, planner, and designer, I would like to say that city, if they can work on affordable housing, that would be really something that we as a city need to think about, because Manhattan is the most expensive place I've lived. And I'm an architect and I still can't buy a house here. So that is something that would work on so many different levels, from livability to economics to all those different aspects that we talked about.
Thank you, Viva. Susan, go ahead.
Just real quick, piggybacking on the last comment, I think, especially since this last category is like the general category, I think our task force, because it's a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force, we tend to talk a lot about different diverse populations of people, but what's maybe missing is thinking about sustainability and environmental sustainability in particular as an equity issue. So like flooding is an equity issue, you know, affordable electricity is an equity issue, like investing in infrastructure like Atabus is an equity issue. And so there's a lot of like infrastructure and sustainability topics that I think could enhance equity in our community. And I would love to keep that in our frame, our focus as well, ideally.
Thank you for saying that, Susan. And then next thing that I was thinking about, and this may have been discussed, I'm coming here for the first time, is that we are talking about different cultural groups, but we are not talking about neurodivergent population, people having varieties of different abilities and needing help. So accessibility is a huge issue that could also really help the city in attracting neurodivergent population. But that is something that we really need to think about, because if we are talking about DEI, then we need to include every group, not just cultural groups.
Exactly. Both really good points. Thank you so much. All right, I think we are going to wrap up this particular section and move on to our next steps as a group. So we have 7 minutes left. And I think, Corey, you're going to talk a little bit about a reminder about what our end goal is.
Yeah, very good. Before I do that, though, I do want to make reference to some comments that have been placed in the chat with Chief Dennis Butler stating, Vanessa, before you forget, thank you for the comments about Officer Townsend, because he's amazing, and then there's some confirmation of that yes, he's awesome, and thank him as well. So once again, just want to make sure that we're open with our chat. So thank you all for those comments. I just will take a brief moment to just remind us what our initial objective and charge was. So I'm just going to reference what we were initially communicated when former Mayor Reddy gathered us in our first meeting, and she talked about making sure that our focus is on providing recommendations to create a more inclusive and welcome community that includes cultural, racial, socioeconomic, ethnic diversity, and the future growth of Manhattan. And so I believe we've made some tremendous headway in that conversation with this SWOT analysis. And so as we move forward, our emphasis is going to be creating those recommendations to our community. And although we would love to be able to accomplish a full end product of a full strategy, I'm not sure that the timeline that we have gives us that opportunity. So I wanted to just keep us on target with opportunities to address our threats and weaknesses. As we divide up in our subgroups, that our focus should be really on how do we address our threats and weaknesses, how do we enhance our strengths, how do we maximize our strengths, and then also reference successful initiatives in other communities. So as we are pulling ourselves together in our subgroups, looking at those benchmarks in areas within Kansas, but even broader, and what can we take from initiatives that are taking place elsewhere. And then also one thing that I think we've done a little bit, but maybe we'll do a little bit more as we get into our subgroups, but references to literature, web pages, and documents that outline best practices. So as we come together, feel free to bring the resources that you have, that you're aware of, whether it's studies or assessments or surveys that have happened within our community or more broader. One book that Tanya has referenced for me, and it was amazing material, but it's a book called The Sum of Us. And I thought it was excellent for the work that we are doing at this time. And so I would highly encourage it for those of us on the task force as we continue to navigate this conversation. But I know that there's plenty more material out there that we may be able to use a reference in our work, and that we can pass forward to the City Commission to let them know that there are some great references and documentation out there that can continue to guide us forward. So just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page in our targets. And of course, we'll have reminders in the future as well. But we thought as we transition to the next phase of our work, we thought it'd be helpful just to have that reminder of what we are hoping to accomplish with this work. That said, I do think we will talk briefly maybe about a subgroup.
Yeah, so we had intended to offer you the opportunity to choose a subgroup tonight, but we are running short of time. So I think, Dennis, is it possible that we could send a survey out to the crew to see which area you would, maybe your top 2 areas that you think you would most enjoy most contribute to in terms of these 5 areas that we have been focusing on, right? So health and wellness, livability, public safety, economic opportunity, individual and family support. And, you know, I know it's going to be a tough choice because I know we all have so much to say about all of these areas, but if you could really think about where you might find your joy in this work, this difficult work. If you could think about that, and we'll send out a survey to get your thoughts, and then share back with you sort of what those groupings might look like, and then offer you opportunity to adjust as you so choose before our next meeting time. Okay. And Corey, you want to talk about our next meeting real quick?
Yeah, so as we plan for our next meeting, I know we have been very conscientious about where we are as a community relating to safety. Based off of all the indicators that we are seeing, it appears that our community is taking a turn in a positive direction in the area of safety. And so maybe because of logistics, as well as just the value of maybe being able to get our groups together in a way that's more efficient, we are going to plan for an in-person connection opportunity in our next meeting. And I'm excited to host you all in the Union. As the on campus, we are still abiding by our phase 3 protocols. So we will still be expecting folks to come with their mask, and we will have socially distant spaces within the Union so that we can still host an open meeting for the community to be able to attend, but also be able to have a more efficient way that we can get our subgroups together and have some robust conversations. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm excited about it. It does appear that we also will be able to offer resources for parking. So parking will not be a concern. So there's covered convenient parking right next to the Union, and we will make sure that is not at a cost to you as a task force member. So I'm looking forward to hosting you, and we will provide more information prior to our next meeting to let you know time, place, and manner. And so once again, this has been an incredible dialogue conversation. Thank you all for taking the time to volunteer and contribute your thoughts and how we can continue to grow and enhance as a community. And I'm looking forward to more conversation as we go forward. So with that, Tanya, is there anything else that you would like to cover before we adjourn our meeting?
I just want to thank everyone for the time. It is so hard after a long day's work to come and do this kind of difficult work. And I just appreciate you all, and you're amazing. Thank you for all that you do, because it is truly appreciated. And I'm just grateful to be part of this group and this community building.
Thank you.
So we'll see everyone on April 22nd.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.